Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Sirhan on X, live from Cincinnati, Ohio, in the United States. Hope everyone had themselves a wonderful 26th of March 2025. One sleep away till opening day here in Cincinnati, and it is going to be a kadoozy because everybody here in Cincinnati knows nobody does opening day like Cincinnati. Yours truly will be a part of the festivities tomorrow. I'm definitely looking forward to it. And it's going to be a fun time and a good time as always. And my favorite part about opening days is the transition of the weather going from the colder winter to the nice breeze of the spring as it starts to approach April. And it's always going to be fun in that part of town in Cincinnati where everybody for one day puts their personal differences aside, bands together in a glow of red and white, and just floods parts of the banks in Cincinnati as if it is going to be like an equivalent of a blood clot because of all the red that's going to be coming through. So, hope everyone had themselves a wonderful day. Uh, those in my X platform, I do have an article on the in my personal tribute to the great big George Foreman after his passing over the weekend. It will be posted here soon. You are more than welcome to read it, and I would divulge on another one of his greatest hits at the end of the show. Go ahead and get right down to it here, real quick. Uh, of course, the big news out of New York is after the Giants signed Jameis Winston, they added Russell Wilson to a 1-year, $20 million contract. Turns out the Giants are the tops in the NFL when it comes to roster mismanagement because I don't know what this is all about. I mean, Russell Wilson wasn't necessarily that great in Pittsburgh. Hasn't really had a great year for about 5 years now. But then again, we find out once again why the New York Giants are the New York Giants. And this is another perfect example of it. I mean, they blew it with Daniel Jones when they offered him that ridiculous contract and, of course, sent him packing. They decided to also keep Brian Daboll when at any competent front office or general manager, which sent him out along with his general manager, John Mara. But it is what it is at this point. And that's a reason why the Giants will finish fourth in the NFC East this season for another season, simply because the roster makeup is not all that great. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me why you would fork out the cash you forked out to Jameis Winston, and then out of nowhere you just add Russell Wilson when you already have Tommy DeVito on that roster after the fiasco with Daniel Jones. And when you basically are just a laughing stock, you're probably going to draft Shedeur Sanders in that third pick overall in the 2025 NFL draft. Right now, the Giants are just simply a circus, and I'm going to take the high road and call it a circus because I promised some people this afternoon I will refrain from using real language to describe them, which would probably sound like the emergency broadcast system tests. But it is what it is over there in New York, and they are a laughing stock. It's a battle between them and the Jets as to which of the New York franchises in the NFL is a laughing stock, given everything both teams did so far this offseason. Now, of course, the Jets did sign Justin Fields, which gives them a little more credibility. But what they did in New York with signing Jameis Winston and Russell Wilson, and more than likely going to draft Shedeur Sanders, when you also have Tommy DeVito on the roster, it's more of an eyebrow raiser, especially when you consider the wide receiver talent you have there in the standout Malik Neighbors. I mean, you would want some guy who could bring some stability at quarterback. But then again, we are talking about the New York Football Giants, who basically have been irrelevant since they won their last Super Bowl in 2012 when they beat the New England Patriots. And they're still going to be irrelevant for quite a while because it's the old adage, the more things change, the more they stay the same. They sent Daniel Jones out the door for all of this. Think about it. I mean, Daniel Jones at least got a playoff one out of it in 2022 over Minnesota. So that's the only thing he can hang his head on, and that's pretty much it. And I don't know what the heck the Giants are going to do other than finish in fourth place. Probably tank for a high draft pick again and basically become a laughing stock again and just get ran all over by the rest of the NFC East, where we're talking about Philadelphia, Washington, and Dallas, because they have substantially better teams than the New York Giants. Crap, even the practice squads of the Eagles, Commanders, and Cowboys are better than the actual NFL Giants roster. That's all I got to say about them. It's going to be an adventurous season in New York, but then again, everybody knows New York loves them some adventures, and they like to be in the media for all the wrong reasons, and the Giants are going to show it again this season. Good luck. I have a lot of Giants fans, followers up there. I got to say, I tip my hat up to you guys because you have to put up with this garbage, and it's even bigger garbage than what you already have put up with the Daniel Jones era, and we know how that ended. Now to Foxborough. Actually, this one's a bit of a confusing one, but it's a case of desperate teams doing desperate things at desperate times. This is a 3-year, $69 million contract offered and given to standout wide receiver Stefon Diggs, the one-time Bill and Texan. The New England Patriots were desperate for a receiver. We all know this. I mean, they wanted to get Drake May a target. It looks like they got him. Not sure I would give the price tag to a player who was just coming off of an ACL tear and massive reconstructive surgery after it, plus the drama he had after the Bills lost the 2022 divisional playoff game to Cincinnati, where he threw a fit to Josh Allen on the sidelines. And basically, he's been a drama queen till Buffalo decided to send him to Houston. And Houston basically just parked him after the injury. And Stefon Diggs decided to walk. And the New England Patriots, being desperate for a wide receiver when they have probably one of the 5 worst wide receiver rooms in the entire NFL, decided to fork out the contract for this particular receiver. Now, if he gets remotely healthy, maybe it's worth it. But right now, they're a laughing stock. And basically, they've been a laughing stock ever since they let Tom Brady walk out the door in 2020. Of course, he made the playoffs with Mac Jones one season, but that's because they had one of the 7 easiest schedules in the league, and they just capitalize on it, only to get dog walked by Buffalo in the 2021 divisional playoffs. And they've been the laughing stock ever since, and they're not going anywhere anytime soon. Now, they made some nice pieces on the defensive side, especially getting Milton Williams. I expect that defense to be better. And I expect Drake May to take the next step in his development and become a better quarterback. But at the end of the day, that's why they're the Patriots. I mean, their biggest thing they've done over the last 2 years was do the world a favor and beat Cincinnati in the 2024 season opener, preventing Cincinnati from going to the playoffs to basically send Bengals fans into the biggest crybaby phase in the history of crybaby phases. That's what Bengals fans are. But back to the Patriots, they probably will be better by default because that roster, they should easily sniff 6 or 7 wins. Not sure about making the playoffs because there's still a ways to go. Not sure this kind of contract to Stefon Diggs is something I would recommend. But given that they had their chance on several receivers, especially Chris Godwin, and supposedly linked to T. Higgins in the offseason, I get why they made this deal. It's a case of desperate teams doing desperate things at desperate times because they needed a receiver. Stefon Diggs was out there, and basically the deal was done. I mean, kudos to him for getting a contract, and I get the Patriots needed a receiver, but I'm not sure this is the one you could have gone after. You could have gone after earlier, especially when they had a chance to get Chris Godwin, which it turns out Godwin returned to Tampa for less money than what the Patriots offered. But I think it's because Godwin has a great chemistry down there with Baker Mayfield and Mike Evans. When those 3 get clicking in Tampa, they're a tough cover, especially in the NFC South. But good luck, New England, because it's going to be another long year where basically, even though you had some nice pieces and some nice signings, you're still not going to overtake Buffalo or Miami in the AFC East. Maybe you can, overtake the Jets because they're the Jets, but that's not saying much at the end of the day. I love talking about these third wave signings because when you get to these third wave signings in the NFL free agency or any free agency of that matter, and you offer a contract like this to somebody on the downturn of this magnitude, it's a case of being desperate and feeling a need to where you can say, I signed a contract or got a player to a contract because I'm desperate for a need. That's what this was with Stefon Diggs and the New England Patriots. I mean, it's a terrible contract, and given the fact that he's coming off the injury he had, it's not going to amount to much. But I get it. They had one of the 7 worst wide receiver rooms in the entire NFL last season, and they probably needed some form of an upgrade. Gives them an upgrade by default, but what does it really say? That's the thing over there in New England right now. Of course, speaking of guys on the downturn, it was Aaron Rodgers apparently talking to the Minnesota Vikings today, and they said they will entertain future conversations. Question I have is, why is everybody still fascinated with a 41-year-old who's both a narcissist and a coward, who wants attention, is a diva, is basically a bona fide douche, a bona fide moron, and a degrading human being, and a declining quarterback who hasn't been relevant since he laid an egg at home to San Francisco in the 2021 divisional playoffs, where he only scored 13 points on his home field as the number 1 seed for the Green Bay Packers. What's everybody's fascination with this guy? It's something I cannot wrap my head around, and nobody wants to give an honest answer to it, especially people like Pat McAfee and Diana Rossini of ESPN, who has this grotesque, psychotic, sick-headed obsession over this guy and want to put him on the news and on the spotlight for whatever reason to fill their narrative and their benefit. I mean, this guy needs to just flat out cease to exist because of the fact this guy is a 41-year-old narcissist and a coward who wants to put his face and the name on the light, try to hang on to what's left of a fading name. And the fact teams are entertaining him speaks volumes to more of the teams wanting this particular character on their roster. Notice I didn't say quarterback, I said character, because that's what he is. And at this point, who knows what's going to happen with him? The guy should just flat out retire, just go away, cease to exist, go into his retreat, stay into his retreat, lock himself up in a retreat in a dark room, and just never come out of there ever again. Because the world is just fed up with this act, fed up with this cowardice, fed up with his narcissism. He showed it basically throughout his entire career, going back to his Green Bay years when he ran Brett Favre out of Green Bay and was basically carried to his Super Bowl ring in 2010. I get it. The guy won 4 MVPs. You can't take that away from him. But epic failure after epic failure after epic failure in Green Bay when he led the Packers to rapid number 1 seeds on many occasions, only to choke out of the playoffs. I mean, it happened in 2012 when he got outplayed by Eli Manning. And as I mentioned, he got outplayed at home at the 2021 divisional against San Francisco, where he only scored 13 points, actually led the offense to 13 points and got shut down on his home field at a time when he actually was among the league leaders among every single major offensive category for a quarterback. And just to absolutely drop his drawers and crap the bed at Lambeau Field says a lot to who he is at the end of the day. I'm sorry, this guy needs to cease to exist, and the NFL would be better off if everybody just pushed this guy out the door and just told him to take a hike for good. It would make the NFL much more fun to watch, because this guy is basically toxic for any NFL roster, period. And I have a lot of Green Bay fans too, and I like Aaron Rodgers for a minute until his ego and his narcissism got into his way. It's time for him to cease and desist. And over there in Minnesota, should be brought up also, they are leaning hard on J.J. McCarthy to be their number 1 quarterback. Rightfully so. You drafted this guy 7th overall. You drafted this guy 7th overall to simply be a clipboard boy. You brought this guy in to become the face of your franchise as your NFL quarterback. Of course, it helps when you have the receiver duo over there in Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. Looking forward to see what he can do as he bounces back after the meniscus surgery. And at this point, he's going to be the one they're going to have to turn to. But they made the draft pick for him for a reason. They believe in him, and they basically said, you're the man. We're handing you the keys. Let's go. That's why they let Sam Darnold walk. Think about that for a minute. especially the year Donald had over there in Minnesota to get him to 14 wins. And we relive an infamous moment for all you individuals in Northeastern Ohio, because every time it's always going to be brought up. And I have to bring it up again because it's an anniversary that's basically one not for the record books, for all the wrong reasons. It was 3 years ago, the trade that basically supposedly shook up the NFL. That didn't. It was the 3 first-round draft picks to Houston from Cleveland. In return, Cleveland got Deshaun Watson, and you know the story there, the fully guaranteed $230 million, these so-called allegations that went on. Again, I'm not using my platform to discuss a particular matter. You guys can have at it. Here's the thing. This guy checked out after getting dog-walked by the Kansas City Chiefs in the 2019 divisional playoffs. He was spotted a 24-0 lead, basically got dog-walked 51-7 the rest of the way, and he basically checked out. Had a subpar 2020 season where he led Houston to, I think it was like 5 or 6 wins at one point. It was basically mediocre by his standards. Sat out the entire 2021 season on a self-imposed holdout in Houston, basically saying his time in Houston was done. And of course, Houston puts him on the trading block, demands a swift compensation package, leave it to the Cleveland Browns, being the Cleveland Browns as they are, to pull the trigger and get this deal done. It was 3 first-round draft picks, a second-round draft pick, a pick swap in the middle. I think it was like in the 5th round. But nonetheless, it turned out to be arguably the worst trade in sports history, which I'll touch on those in a second. But the thing is, 3 years ago, all you guys in Northeastern Ohio thought when you got Deshaun Watson and that fully guaranteed contract, when you forked out the draft capital, you guys were going to run Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow out of Baltimore and Cincinnati, respectively. And you thought you was going to be the cream of the crop in the AFC North over Baltimore, Cincinnati, and Pittsburgh. That didn't happen. Cincinnati won the division title in 22. Baltimore won it in 23 and 24. And basically, in 22, you didn't make the playoffs. In 2023, Deshaun Watson gets hurt. You call Joe Flacco off the couch. Joe Flacco leads you to the playoffs, only to get dog-walked by, guess who? The team he made the trade for, the Houston Texans. And of course, last year, we know the Browns were just a definition of a catastrophic failure of intentional proportions in a deliberate manner also. And of course, Deshaun Watson suffers the injury. You know, everybody's going to have their say about him, given his character off the field. Have at it. But this is the same fan base who 3 years ago said they were going to overtake the AFC North over Baltimore, Pittsburgh, and Cincinnati when they got Deshaun Watson, went to bat for him, went to bat for every single thing, used every excuse in the book. And now, fast forward 3 years later, they want to throw this guy under the bus. Don't tell me 1 second you thought this guy was going to overtake the AFC North with that team in Cleveland, and this quarterback was going to run Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow out of Cincinnati, but now you want to go ahead and act like, you know, you never said it. The football world seen what you guys said. The football world knows what you guys said. The football world knows your stance. The football world knows what happened on that day when you made the trade and how you guys conducted yourselves and how you guys carried yourselves. And now 3 years later, you guys are getting dead 100% exactly what you deserved, simply because now you guys want to go turncoat, two-face, and act like nothing happened. We've seen the stories. We've seen the act. Don't absolve yourselves from any of this because you wanted this guy as a reason to throw Baker Mayfield under the bus because Baker Mayfield wasn't good enough, and you guys still refuse to give an honest answer why you thought Baker Mayfield wasn't good enough. Because I said, you can argue the talent between the two, Deshaun Watson and Baker Mayfield. I mean, Deshaun Watson's, say what you want, but his collegiate stats in Clemson was pretty formidable. I mean, he was drafted number 1 overall for a reason. Baker Mayfield, maybe not the better quarterback, but for what they did in Cleveland, he was a better fit. He got you guys to the playoffs, got you the playoff win in Pittsburgh. After you could argue, did the best he could to get you that playoff win in Kansas City until you guys couldn't stop the fourth down play. But for you guys to intentionally throw Baker Mayfield under the bus without an explanation so you can get Deshaun Watson and watch this catastrophic failure just blow up in your face, right now you guys in Cleveland got exactly what you deserve. And I said this many times, and it's been worth repeating. When you guys got Deshaun Watson and supported him and backed him 3 years ago, you made that bed. Now you guys can go ahead and shut your mouths and go lie in it. Because as that ship is sinking, as the Deshaun Watson bandwagoning or whatever you want to call it is basically hitting rock bottom, the Browns fans can join them. Because you guys wanted this. You guys asked for it. You put him on a pedestal he had no business being on, especially in the AFC North, thinking he was going to run Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow out of Baltimore and Cincinnati, respectively, because of the fully guaranteed contract. Not only does it turn out to be arguably the worst trade in sports history, but as I said, it's probably the all-time biggest backfire in sports history because it's egg on your face, and the respective fan bases in Baltimore and Pittsburgh, as well as many others in the NFL, are laughing at you guys day after day, week after week, month after month, since you made the deal, and if they're still doing it to this day, and rightfully so. How are you going to manage all of this? We know that this guy checked out in 2019 after losing to Kansas City in the 2019 divisional playoffs, basically just threw in the towel. And from that point on, has been really nothing short of irrelevant. I mean, he's relevant for the wrong reasons. Doesn't mean he's necessarily relevant. It means he's irrelevant. And as I said, all you guys in Cleveland, as a ship is sinking, as all this is happening, as egg in your face, you can shut your mouths and go lie in the bed you made when you wanted this guy 3 years ago. And we talk about some of the worst trades in sports history. That's probably the crux of them all. The original one of this, you could go back to 1988 when the Dallas Cowboys fleeced the Minnesota Vikings out of a boatload of picks for Herschel Walker. Was considered the most lopsided and at the time, the worst trade in sports history before this. And the NBA, actually, a few of them in recent years had this. You could argue what took place not too long ago with Luka Doncic traded to the Lakers for Anthony Davis. That's probably up there. How about what took place a few years ago when the Clippers and the Thunder, I just turned out the Thunder traded Paul George to the Clippers for Chris Paul and a bunch of picks, and a throw-in was none other than Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And for my NBA followers, you know the season Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is having right now in Oklahoma City, while Paul George is just falling off the map and his body just flat out fell apart after he went to LA and now in Philly. Of course, him going to Paul George to LA was one of the reasons why Kawhi Leonard wanted to join them, and we know what type of a failure that's been. Of course, way back when the Indianapolis Colts jumped John Elway to the Broncos, you know the story of that one. Colts forever couldn't get to that point. John Elway became a top 15 all-time great quarterback. You could probably argue top 10. Same way with the Falcons involving Brett Favre once upon a time. We know the story on that one. Joe Montana to the Kansas City Chiefs. Of course, the 49ers went on to win the Super Bowl, but why would you trade arguably the greatest player in your franchise history? You could talk about baseball way back when Frank Robinson was traded from the Reds to the Orioles, because in 1970, he helped the Orioles win the World Series against, guess who? The Cincinnati Reds. There's another one there. Boatloads of them. I could go on with this. But maybe you could argue what happened 3 years ago today between Cleveland and Houston is now the gold standard of bad trades in sports, and why you don't fork out that kind of draft capital, doesn't matter who you are or what you are, to get a player who's been basically irrelevant and brought nothing but baggage and basically a dark cloud to a franchise that basically had enough dark clouds as it is. And that's why it happened what it happened. And that's why you could probably argue it's the worst trade in sports history. Probably going to be more down the line because people are just crazed up over wanted to send guys out the door, not wanting to pay guys when it comes to ownership. And I'm not talking just the NFL. I'm talking all sports. And one more thing on the NFL before I proceed. It was mentioned tonight, just minutes ago, in one of the most bizarre things that makes me wonder why the NFL wants to be more bizarre. Is now this nose wipe celebration is now going to be a 15-yard personal foul penalty. If you guys don't know, I guess they take the hand and go across the nose for the first down. And just when the NFL just can't get out of its own way, the NFL finds a way to be unable to get out of its own way in one of the most comedian-like, comic-like rule you could probably come across. The NFL is all about the dollars. We know this. It's all about the rankings. We know this. We know how it generates dollars. It generates revenue. And of course, they like to try ways to manipulate their product because they know the consumer is so gullible to fall for it. That's why the NFL wants to manipulate the rules as they do. And we have another case of this here. I mean, everyone's going to complain about it, rightfully so, because it's just flat out crazy. But the same people who are going to complain about it will be watching the NFL because that's how business runs. That's why the NFL has gotten away with everything they've gotten away with when it comes to the rules committee over the last several years. It basically changing rules after rules after rules. Of course, the other day, it was the moving the touchback to the 35-yard line to try and help kickoff returns when everybody knows there's going to be more kickoffs out of the end zone for touchbacks. At some point, they're probably going to eliminate kickoffs, and we're going to have another mess. The NFL knows the consumer will always watch the product. The NFL knows that a consumer will voice their reasoning, but they're still going to turn on the TV, the phone, the mobile device, the laptop, the live streaming channels, all that stuff to watch the NFL. And that's why the NFL doesn't give a darn about whatever they want to say they give a darn about, because we know it's about the dollars, the generating revenue, and that's why the NFL gets away with the things they get away with. I mean, like it or not, I mean, I don't like some of the rules myself, but what would I going to do? Nothing, because the NFL doesn't give a darn what I say. They're only in it for themselves, filled with narcissists like Roger Goodell and Troy Vincent. So, but this particular thing, I mean, that's why people call it the No Fun League. The same people who call it the No Fun League are probably the ones that's going to be watching the games anyways. So let's see where this one goes. I mean, the rules changes have gotten worse and worse and worse each year. I mean, I get they want to simplify the game. They have a load of rule proposals supposed to be taking place here soon. It was presented. We'll find out who passes and who doesn't pass, because it's going to be a ways to go. I didn't like the dynamic kickoff because it didn't amount to much, because they want to implement what the XFL did. One thing people forget, I mean, the XFL and the NFL are two totally different leagues with two different types of dynamics. To try and integrate the two together is something that's going to wind up being a bad backfire. We'll see where this one goes. And on the historical fight side, for my fight followers, of course, this weekend we saw the passing of George Foreman. God rest his soul. But it was 51 years ago today, maybe his explosive performance as a heavyweight champion took place. This was in Caracas, Venezuela. And for all you idiot Americans out here who complain about fights not taking place in America, this was George Foreman out of Houston, Texas, taking on Ken Norton out of San Diego, California. Two Americans fighting in Caracas, Venezuela. Foreman was a champion. Norton was a top contender. Norton, of course, not too long ago, beat Muhammad Ali in the first of their epic trilogy to get this title shot. Foreman, little more than a year removed from just destroying and dismantling Joe Frazier. And he did the same thing here to Ken Norton. Basically, the first fight was a standoff. The first round was a bit of a standoff. Turns out in the second round, George Foreman said, "The heck with it. I'm going to beat down Norton." Floors him 3 times. After the third knockdown, Norton barely beats the count, but the referee decided to wave it off and reward George Foreman the win as he successfully defended his heavyweight championship. The last time he defended his championship before he lost it to Muhammad Ali in the Rumble in the Jungle in Kinshasa, Zaire. Ken Norton was a fighter with probably the most impressive physique, maybe in boxing history. I mean, the images are out there. I mean, a multi-sport athlete himself, you would think. But always fit, always in shape, always gave an honest effort against anyone he fought. Had the trilogy with Ali, beat many other fighters, especially a Jerry Quarry, and gave Larry Holmes all he could handle on June 15th, 1978 for a classic and colossal super fight that took place in Las Vegas. Thing was, he was one of the guys that felt the wrath of George Foreman 51 years ago in Caracas, Venezuela. But an impressive physique, basically athletes was in his particular family. Of course, the modern people know Ken Norton Jr., the one-time standout linebacker for the Dallas Cowboys and San Francisco 49ers. Of course, that is Ken Norton's son. I believe he's like an assistant somewhere. I can't think where. I think he's an assistant coach somewhere. But athletics has been in the blood of the standout Ken Norton. And we talk about these 70s heavyweights. He's right there with them. We talk about Ali, Foreman, Frazier, Shavers, maybe a couple other guys like Jerry Quarry, Oscar Buenavena, of course, eventually Leon Spinks, and wrap it all off, Larry Holmes. Ken Norton was just an amazing specimen who gave Muhammad Ali all he can handle in that trilogy. Some could argue the third fight, he should have been rewarded the decision. Some people call it a robbery in Ali's favor. I wouldn't go that far. So I thought Norton should have been awarded the win. But it was a close fight, a competitive fight, like the other 2 fights in the Norton-Ali trilogy. But Ken Norton was a standout himself. Had that famous cross-arm defense that George Foreman later implemented when he came back in his second tenure as a heavyweight. Brutal puncher, had a massive knockout record himself, and was a standout athlete and a standout fighter himself. Again, athletics was in his particular blood. Of course, his son being in the NFL. That tells you the deep pedigree that Ken Norton had. Probably can say a top 20 all-time great heavyweight, and he was a standout within his own right. Just ran into the buzzsaw that was George Foreman 51 years ago in Caracas, Venezuela. And of course, it was at this point people thought Foreman was the irresistible force and the immovable object wrapped into one after he dismantled Frazier and Norton. But of course, it was the Rumble in the Jungle, October 30th, 1974, exactly 7 months and 4 days after this fight, where basically the invincibility wasn't really there because George Foreman had this mindset of, because he pummeled Frazier and Norton the way he did, he was going to do the same to Muhammad Ali. That didn't work because George Foreman, who was an amazing specimen, just ran into a guy who's basically the greatest in the history of the heavyweight division. And it basically showed in the Rumble in the Jungle. May God rest the souls of both Foreman and Norton, 2 of the standouts of the 1970s that was basically the heavyweight division at a time when the heavyweight division was not just a glamour division in boxing, but the overall glamour division in all the sports. They considered the heavyweight championship of the world at that time was the premier prize in all of sports, not just boxing, but all of sports. I mean, you had your Super Bowls, your NBA titles. Maybe the only thing that trumped winning the heavyweight championship was winning the gold medal representing your country in whatever sport. But of course, that's a whole different dynamic. But it was 51 years ago today when the heavyweight championship of the world meant something. George Foreman, the champion, retained his title with a second-round beatdown of Ken Norton. And nobody at that time beat Ken Norton like that. Of course, he had a couple brutal knockout losses in the back end of his career to Ernie Shavers and Jerry Cooney. But yeah, he was on his downturn. Shavers and Cooney were probably two of the more brutal punchers of the back end of the 70s when there were a bunch of guys who could bang. I mean, you could argue Ernie Shavers was one of the premier pure hard punchers in boxing history, right there with Foreman. And when he just pasted Ken Norton on the canvas, that was all she wrote. But Ken Norton is a standout himself. Everybody talks about Ali, Frazier, and Foreman. Maybe in his own way, Ken Norton is sort of underrated in that regard, simply because nobody talks about him with the 70s. I mean, he had the trilogy with Ali, maybe not at the level that Ali Frazier was, but it was pretty darn close because Ken Norton gave Ali all he can handle. He basically got the win over Jerry Quarry to get the title shot against Larry Holmes. And that basically spun off to a heck of a career for Ken Norton. I mean, maybe the end game for him was the Holmes fight where it was back and forth. Whoever won the 15th round won the fight. Again, that 15th round, probably the greatest round in heavyweight championship boxing history. And at that point, take your pick. I mean, two judges thought Holmes won it. One judge thought Norton won it. Close decision that's as hotly disputed as Hagler-Leonard is. I mean, right there, probably behind Hagler-Leonard in terms of hotly disputed decisions that are just like so close, it basically divides the fan base. That's how great the Holmes-Norton fight was, and that's how underrated the great Ken Norton was. He just ran into a buzzsaw on George Foreman 51 years ago. Boy, I wish I could talk about more underrated fighters like this, because here's the thing, and this is what got me in the boxing community the first time. Too many of you guys are just so fixated on highlight reels. Too many of you guys are fixated on recency bias. Too many of you guys are fixated on what took place before you went to bed. Maybe you guys need to start spending your time thinking about what took place long before what we have today. Because there's a lot worth reading, there's a lot worth talking about, and there's a lot worth watching on the YouTube videos, film study. It's all out there now. The technology is out there. I mean, footage of big fights all over the place, especially from ones in the past. I would highly recommend everyone in the boxing community to have a different perspective when they talk about what's going on in the sport, because when you think about what took place then versus now, a lot of what's happening now doesn't happen what took place then, simply because everyone's so fixated on what happens, today or coming up. Too many people are so narrow-minded when it comes to the sport of boxing, and that's why I pick and choose who I deal with when it comes to the sport, because the last time I was in it, I had too much of an open mind and too much is cluttered into my head, and I learned from that the importance of understanding and appreciating what came before me. Because when I grew up, boxing was the premier sport in all of sports. I mean, you couldn't watch SportsCenter without boxing being the lead story, whatever fight it was. I mean, all the names were out there: Hagler, Leonard, Hearns, Duran, Larry Holmes, Hector Camacho, Julio Cesar Chavez, Pernell Whitaker, among the many others. But those were the genuine greats of the time. And it seemed like every time you see someone fight, just one fight, you want to put him on a historic pedestal that they have no business being on, despite what you guys see. Maybe you guys need to take a little perspective of what happens now compared to what happened then, because a lot of the pathways that was left by the originators and the pioneers from way back when, I can go all the way back to a guy like John L. Sullivan and even Jack Johnson. Shoot, I've always said all along, we're not having conversations about a lot of these other fighters like Ali, Ray Robinson, Joe Louis, even Larry Holmes, Mike Tyson, or Evander Holyfield, or Lennox Lewis, if it wasn't for Jack Johnson back in 1908 when he beat Tommy Burns. There needs to be a greater perspective on what's in this sport, and too many of you guys just get so short-sighted and small-visioned when it comes to what happens now, thinking everything is happening today and that boxing happened, today. It didn't. That's why I sit back and watch the historical perspective before I follow the current perspective, because I get a greater understanding and a better appreciation of how it was when I got to this point. Because if you don't have it in the sport, the appreciation of those before you, you're not going to have any appreciation of what's going on today. Because everybody in the boxing community finds everything wrong with everything. That's why I quit dealing with people who obsess over governing bodies, because they're the biggest bunch of crock garbage God ever created. And too many of you guys are fixated with governing bodies. I don't talk about belts, but you guys like to talk about belts. That's where you guys are the problem. I don't talk about, fantasy matchups, fighter of the 1960s versus fighters of today. You guys do, and that's a problem. Maybe just sit back and just observe, watch, appreciate, and enjoy. That's what it comes down to. That's why I pick and choose carefully and thoroughly who I deal with and what I talk to. Not just in boxing, but in all sports, especially the NFL. Because I had the same mistakes when I was in the NFL community not too long ago. I mean, way before I started doing this. I mean, we're talking like years back. Because I basically went on a rant about the fiasco that took place in Cincinnati after the Steelers-Bengals game. And everybody just had their panties all up in a bunch over me. I had a different, almost maniacal, ugly view to where it almost got me in trouble. I had to walk away. I did the same thing also with the boxing community for many of those reasons also. When I came back not too long ago, like just a few years ago, especially those who are watching me on the X platform and who got me started on this X platform, you guys know who you are. It's boxing, NFL, all sports. It's a different view for me now. It's not what it used to be. Because I study, I observe, and I take notes in my head, try to understand what goes on, how you guys talk about it, what you're talking about. And not only that, can you guys dissect the performance of any NFL player or any boxer rightfully and respectively? And respectfully, I should add. Because that's what it was all about with me. Because when I put this microphone back on, I still a fan like all of you guys do. I'm still a fan like all of you guys are. I will always be. But when I put this on, I put the fandom away simply because I have to learn how to separate the fan versus the analyst. And that's what I'm going to be doing. I love the hell out of everybody and all the ones I've dealt with in this community, and especially the NFL and boxing. But a lot of you guys who I talk to, or even the ones I try to talk to and won't listen, I just say this respectively, do better. Because there's some of you guys, I'm not going to put names out there, not the ones that that follow me on the X platform or the Facebook platform, or who I deal with on a day-to-day basis. They don't count. They're just all wonderful people. It's the ones I try to interact with and try to have this closed-minded mindset, especially in the NFL community in Cincinnati, who is just the worst at it, and especially those in the boxing community. And I'm not going to put names, especially the so-called aficionados, the big-name aficionados out there, especially ones I went after not too long ago, who try to sucker you into their narrative. And when they sucker you into their narrative and you fall for it, that's it. You can almost see it. I've learned how to watch it. I've learned how to study it. I've learned how to see it. And that's where I've learned how to walk away and to stay to who I am and what I am. And I've said this all along when it comes to me. What you see is what you get. You're not going to see me partake in all of this clickbait or any of this overselling or over fandom, simply because that's not who I am. If I said I'm going to be a fan, but I'm going to be a fan of my own. I'm not involved in these crazy groupies, especially the ones when it comes to some of the local sports here and some of the ones I deal with in the boxing community in the past. They know who they are. I'm talking about the bad apples, and man, we have a lot of bad apples out there. I stay away from them. I learned how to pick, and I learned how to pick well. And as I take this show to bigger platforms such as Apple, iHeart, and Spotify, I will continue to do so because I cannot bring myself down to any of that level or bring myself down to that any kind of grotesque fandom that goes on all over the place. Why? It's not who I am. Because if I got to that point to where I bring myself down to that level, especially a bunch of the individuals I've dealt with in both the NFL and boxing communities at the bad apple side, and they know who they are, what does that say about me at the end of the day? Sometimes I feel like I can give a pep talk about all of this because a lot of people try to sucker me in. I get a bunch of emails. I get a bunch of letters. I get a bunch of this and a bunch of that. I mean, I'm just a guy. I don't proclaim myself to be an insider. I don't proclaim myself to be a know-it-all. I don't proclaim myself to be the guru or the person that knows every single thing. There's some things I don't know, but I'm going to give you my best and honest opinion. The key word's being best and honest because there's a lot of you guys and the ones you guys deal with that don't. I feel like I could go on and on with this if I want to. So I'll just talk about it some other time. And that'll wrap up this edition of Sirhan on X. As always, as I wrap the show up, I always tell everyone one simple thing. Make self-care your number one priority in all of life. Because if you take care of yourself first, good things follow, and you stay true to yourself, nothing but good things will happen. Don't let anyone treat you as a priority when at the end of the day, what they are to you is only an option. Stay true to yourself. Good things come your way. Good karma follows you, and good things follow. That'll do it for this night. I hope everyone has themselves a wonderful rest of the 26th of March, 2025. I will be at opening day tomorrow in Cincinnati. For people on my platforms, I will be sharing highlights and pictures and everything. And I'll be back later on that night with a show and a couple of other NFL podcasts. But until then, have a wonderful night. Take care of yourselves, and God bless.